Go. 10th. We need to get inside, said Don Redmond. He and Nell were standing in the dark in a pouring northwest rain that rattled the tin awning roof over the porch on which they stood. A sagging swing drooped on one edge of the porch, and a sodden pile of firewood logs loomed gray and lumpy on the other. It had taken some time for them to find the place. Their raincoats and the brims of their fedoras were dripping. "We don't have a warrant," pointed out Nell. In view of his state connection, it might be prudent to get one, just to preserve the niceties. In case we find something, or more especially in case we don't. "I'm willing to go section 30 on this and cross my fingers it will stand up," said Redmond. "If the issue comes up at all." "Ah, the breathing act," chuckled Nell. "You got it, Sarge," replied Redmond. "The lovely section 30 of the Offenses Against the State Act, the law that gives us the authority to do whatever the hell we think is necessary to preserve the revolution and carry out our duties. I know we're supposed to show sensitivity and gentlemanly circumspection as to when and how we, H. Covington, invoke it. Don't want the citizenry to feel that they're living in a police state, even if they are, rather. But this is a big case, and big consequences hang on it. I'll take responsibility. Although just as a historical note, getting a warrant was never any kind of legal protection. It never made any difference to the American police under Zog. Warrants are meaningless when the judge simply signs whatever outrageous piece of rubbish the police put before him. If your judiciary is corrupt, and your judicial system is broken, why bother with the fig leaf of a warrant? That's what I like about the Republic, this refreshing absence of hypocrisy. I'd prefer a refreshing absence of rain right now. You know, even in Boss we do have to prove our case before we take action, if only to our own superiors. I know he's our man, but I don't still think we'll ever prove it. What makes you think we are going to find anything in here relevant to a crime committed more than 30 years ago, sir?" asked Nell in some exasperation. "What would he keep? Why would he keep anything that might implicate him in such a monstrous act of betrayal?" "Depends on why he did it," ruminated Redmond. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Generally speaking, something that might at least give us a clue to motive. But specifically—" "I'm damned if I know, Sarge," replied Redmond. "I can only hope that we'll know it when we see it." "Well, let's get out of the bloody rain at least." "Door or window?" asked Nell. Door, I think. This lock must be at least a century old. Doesn't even look like it has any electronics in it. Straight brass tumblers. Wonder what kind of alarm system he's got rigged in there, if any." "Why would he have any alarm system?" asked Nell. "This isn't America. No one has to worry about burglary anymore." Redmond took out a small folding tool, similar to a penknife, with a number of oddly shaped extensions. He diddled with the lock for about a minute. It clacked and the door swung open. The two men stepped inside. "Might as well turn on the lights. No one is going to see us this far out in the woods," said Redmond. He snapped a light switch, but nothing happened. "Must run off a separate generator," he commented. "A house this old is probably not even hooked up with a transformer converter for the broadcast power grid." Nell took out a flashlight and turned it on. Redmond took a glow wand from his pocket and thumbed the switch. Immediately the room was illuminated in soft light, almost like a rising dawn. "I always carry one of these as well as a flashlight," said Redmond. "A flashlight is useful when you don't want your target to see you, but you want to see him. Always use a flashlight if there is any chance at all you're going to be shot at, and hold it away from your body. But for a search, a wand is best. It lights up the whole room." The two boss men saw battered, antique 20th century plastic furniture, bits and pieces of hunting and fishing detritus, and a lot of dust. "Not much of a housekeeper, is he?" sniffed Nell. "I don't think he comes here often," said Redmond. "I only just by chance remembered this place even exists." They separated and moved from room to room. The place had a dismal, careless, unlived-in look. Redmond mounted the stairs and rummaged through an unremarkable bedroom with a single old-fashioned box spring mattress and frame. The sheets and blanket were rumpled and the pillow folded. God alone knew how long ago the bed had last been made. Suddenly he heard Nell call from downstairs. His voice sounded choked and strange. "Colonel Redmond! Colonel, you need to come and see this." Redmond went back downstairs and moved to the rear of the house. The doorway in which Nell stood seemed to lead into what might have once been a breakfast nook or small den. Redmond held his glow wand high, lighting the darkness of the interior, and he saw what Nell had seen, At one end of the room was a wooden-paneled wall of bare and unpainted pine that had gone dark with age, and on that wall was tacked 2 rows of photographs, each one of them blown up into small poster size. There weren't many of them, only about a dozen, because the woman who featured in them had made it a point to be photographed as little as possible. 2 of the photographs were long-ago police mugshots. They showed a young and beautiful girl with long blonde hair. Below the wall was a bureau or dresser of some kind, draped in a white cloth, and on it stood several rows of burned-out candles, the votive kind in small glass. H. A. Covington. Receptacles. A single chair stood in front of the primitive altar, where the sole worshipper of a strange and unhealthy religion sometimes sat in contemplation and adoration. "Bring your light in as well," said Redmond, stepping into the room. In the soft yet penetrating illumination of the phosphorescent wand and the flashlight, the slapdash montage might have looked cheap and pathetic, but somehow it did not. Both men felt a cold and creeping chill in their blood. They intuitively understood that they were looking at something strong, poisonous, and terrible, the outward manifestation of a love that had transcended the bounds of time and sanity, a love that had developed a life of its own and fed on itself, time and again ripping out its own entrails and rising from the putrescence of its own grave to live unnaturally over and over. There was no blood-stained altar whereon sacrifice had been made. That had been done long ago on a hillside many miles away. "It's a shrine," muttered Nell. "A shrine to her. Wait a minute. That's not Melanie Young." "No," agreed Redmond. "I agree. One would think this kind of obsession would be over Melanie Young. Hell, our whole nation obsesses over her, starting with every teenaged boy when he hits age 12. But that's not Melanie. That's Trudy Griner. Probably every photograph ever taken of her in her whole life. He must have gotten into the boss files somehow and made copies. I'm sure he could figure a way. Damn, that looks like her junior high school class photo. Wonder how the hell he ever got hold of that. That's Trudy when she was as young and as beautiful as ever Melanie was, to give her fair due. Thank God, thank God, thank God," moaned Redmond, leaning against the creaking dusty wall in a sudden release of terrible tension from his mind and his heart. "Eh?" asked Nell. "What do you mean, Colonel?" "The betrayal of the column. This whole hideous mess, all those deaths of our people. Thank God it wasn't religious, it wasn't political, it wasn't even for money," laughed Redmond in shaky relief. "It was insanity. Just good old-fashioned Looney Tune, they're coming to take me away ha-ha movement goo-boo. The kind of nuttiness that was the very hallmark of what little community we had back in the old man's day. Good old-fashioned movement goo-boo, Lord love it. Now I'm going to go find the generator for this place and start it up so we can get some proper light on the scene. Then we toss this place good and proper from top to bottom. He may have left something else behind. You know, I always wanted to do this, since I saw my first Agatha Christie movie," Don Redmond told them all with a grin. He was standing in the library at the presidential residence of Longview House, leaning insouciantly against the wall, his fedora at rakish angle on his head. Before him on the chairs and sofas sat a group of 10 people. These were former FATPO defector Arthur M.C. Bride, all 8 of the surviving volunteers from the Olympic flying column, and the state president, John Corbett Morgan, who was scowling angrily at Don in a manner like piling dark thunderheads in the sky, which presaged unfortunate events. The detective's dream. I always wanted to do the Hercule Poirot number, gather all the suspects in the library and reveal the killer's identity through my brilliant deduction. It had better be damn brilliant deduction, muttered Morgan irritably. Jesus Christ on a raft, Don. You know I wouldn't go along with this kind of dog and pony show from anybody who hadn't given me some mighty fine grandkids? Colonel Redmond, I highly resent the term suspect, said Dr. Joseph Cord huffily. I have the most impeccable credentials of anyone here, and I'm accustomed to receiving invitations to Longview House only to discuss and praise my work. How long is this going to take? All of interplanetary space is my domain, and I have more important things to do than sit here and play childish games. How long will it take? How long is a piece of string? Asked Redmond. Don't worry, folks. I've called down to the kitchen and asked for coffee and drinks to be sent up, and also some herbal tea for you, Mrs. M.C. Canless. And why is that entire sordid incident at Raven Hill Ranch being resuscitated in any case? Complained Cord crankily. My understanding has always been that there was never any doubt as to informed on the Olympic flying column. It was Gertrude Greiner.
No, Dr. Cord, said Redmond firmly. It was not Trudy Greiner, H. Covington.
Then it was one of us, said SS General Bill Vitale grimly, his large frame in camouflage fresh from the front lounging in a leather armchair. I have to agree with Dr. Cord, Don. Under such circumstances, this Mad Hatter's Tea Party is just a little bit wearing. If you have something to tell us, then say it. Colonel, you must have asked us here for a reason, said Brittany MC, canless anxiously. You must have found out something new about what happened at Ravenhill. What is it? It's not so much that we have found out what happened at Ravenhill, comrade, but that we have found out what did not happen there, said Don. At a certain point in our investigation, it became apparent that Trudy Greiner could not possibly have committed the crime she was accused of committing. How could you tell that? Asked Palmieri. How could you tell that when my own court of inquiry just a couple of years after it happened couldn't tell that? Demanded Morgan. Oh, you were in charge of that, were you, sir? Oh yeah, I remember now. I read it in the file. Don turned to the others. We were lucky enough to make one key discovery, which very understandably escaped you at the time, Mr. President. You weren't fortunate enough to have a partner from the Transvaal. To begin with, the question of motive struck me as significant. I couldn't quite get a take on why Trudy would betray her comrades, including a man whom everyone agrees that she loved. All of you still living who knew her personally have concurred that betrayal for money, no matter how much money, was totally out of character for Trudy Greiner. I agree. I never bought that, said Leach, shaking his head. Redmond continued. Gertrude Greiner had no other conceivable motive other than the possible one of jealousy, and everyone who was there seems to agree that this was also unlikely. She never exhibited any symptoms of jealousy, and seemed to accept the situation between her former lover Commandant Murdoch and Melanie Young. As a certain someone told me at the beginning of this case, she was a good soldier. Neither did Trudy have the opportunity to commit the crime. Her cell phone was down because it depended on a communications satellite that crashed. She was in the middle of the meeting at the safe house when the phone call to the FAPO commander was made. And to make a long story short, so far as we could determine, it was impossible for her to be the culprit. That indicated to me that there was at least one other person involved. That person might be dead, or fled to the States, or Aslan long ago. Transportation Minister Palmieri reminded Redmond. True, but the fact that he or she existed was significant to me. Hell may hold no fury like unto a woman scorned, but jealous women contemplating a murder of passion usually do not involve third parties. Such a thing is too intimate. Nor do they take another 50 uninvolved people along for the ride. Most importantly, we now know that whoever made that call conveyed information to the enemy which Trudy Greiner had no way of knowing, specifically the number and type and colors of the vehicles that would be in the NVA convoy. But there was a problem. The one insurmountable obstacle we kept running up against, the one damning fact that seemed to prove Trudy guilty for all time, was the $1 million payoff which was allegedly collected by her on the morning of the ambush, said Don. In the heat of the revolution's aftermath, just coming out of a time when betrayal was so terribly common in the NVA, and some of our comrades had been betrayed to the Americans for the price of a bottle of whiskey, this motive was very convincing indeed. Very early on it struck me that we had no real evidence Trudy had ever actually received the money. Old photocopies of computer printouts do not rank high in my estimate of evidence. In point of fact, we had no indication that anyone had ever received that money. No original documentation. No photographic evidence or actual fingerprint ID, which was in use at the time. Only a notation on a piece of paper that such an ID had been provided, and that struck me as odd. There wasn't even a signature on what documentation we had. Oh, come on now. A woman walks into a bank, she gets handed a check for $1 million, and they don't even get a signature? But then, a faked signature was a little bit beyond our trader's technical capacities. He could dummy up computer-generated material but not handwriting, at least not well enough to fool an expert graphologist if one ever looked at it. He knew his limitations and so he avoided that trap. That was what first tipped me off that something was off-kilter. No signature on any kind of document or receipt for $1 million? Not even a H. Covington. Photostat. Then I spoke with Charlie Randall, who had participated in the hunt for Trudy on behalf of the WPB, and he told me that the one time they actually got close enough to make any personal observations on their target, the poor woman was a poor woman in every sense of the word, definitely not living a millionaire lifestyle. More and more, I became convinced that there never was any $1,000,000 payoff, at least not to Trudy Griner. But after all this time it was impossible to prove, one way or another. Then it turned out that the Bank of America vice president who allegedly signed the $1,000,000 check never existed. "How do you know that, Colonel?" asked Lars Frierson keenly. "I didn't, at first, and I probably never would have, but fortunately my detective sergeant was a bit more on the ball than I was," admitted Redmond. "He spotted something I never would have spotted. Only because I happen to be an Afrikaner, sir," said Nell. "A cultural thing. I noticed that the alleged vice president of the bank who signed the draft order for the $1,000,000 check was one J.P. Vander Merwe." "So what?" demanded President Morgan impatiently. "You didn't grow up in South Africa, Meneer Staatspresident." "I did, or what was left of South Africa after the horror of March 17, 1992. In this country we tell Wyoming jokes. In Ireland they tell Kerry jokes. In South Africa we tell Vander Merwe jokes. There is no J.P. Vander Merwe. He's a fictional character, a national joke name, like Joe Sixpack, or the Jukes and the Calicax, like Tommy Atkins, the typical British soldier, like G.I. Joe or Jimmy Higgins, like Till Eulenspiegel among the Germans, or Cowboy Bob in our own Wyoming jokes. J.P. Vander Merwe is a kind of Afrikaner everyman. He has many lives and many silly adventures in our culture, Meneer, but signing off on $1,000,000 checks to traitors who betray the white race is not among them. Suppose you had seen those computer printouts on that $1,000,000 check, and it had been issued by Vice President Joe Dokes, or Beavis and Butthead. That is what it looked like to me. The double doors to the library swung open, and Old Man Nash came shuffling in, pushing a tea cart loaded with a large coffee urn, cups, glasses, and liquor and beer bottles. "This is your party, so you can do your own damned bartending," he snapped at Don. The rest of them ignored him, fascinated by the story Don was unfolding. "So you're saying that the Olympic flying column was betrayed by a South African?" asked Admiral Leach in puzzlement. "Or someone who knew who J.P. Vander Merwe is," said Nell, standing and beginning to move toward the door. "You know they call us Africa's white tribe, and in a way we are. But long ago, even before we destroyed ourselves, there was another white tribe in southern Africa. A smaller one, but not a bad bunch of blokes, really. Most of them, anyway." Nell slid his gun from his shoulder holster. "They were once called Rhodesians," said Don, standing as well, his pistol in his hand. "Ironic, isn't it, Nash? That crap on those phony bank documents was probably the only joke you ever made in your entire bleak and horrible and humorless life. And now, after almost 40 years, it comes back to bite you." "You bloody cack bastard," hissed Nell in utter rage and loathing, as Nash stared at him. "A crime like this, done by a white African. How can we ask them now to give us back our Hughesland? You have disgraced us all forever, you dog." In a proper detective story, now would have been the time for the killer to break down and render an emotional confession to the group, and then be taken away for some future stern but unseen punishment off stage. Prior to his exit, he would have added in the few details necessary to supplement the brilliant detective's deductions. But this was not a mystery. It was a horror story, and in the Northwest American Republic, punishment tended not to be delayed over long. Corey Nash was a very old man, and no one dreamed he could still move as fast as he did. Nash hurled a full pint bottle of beer at Don's head, turned the drinks cart over with a crash, and managed to trip Nell, and then he turned and tore open the double doors. He dodged the outstretched arm of the cursing Sergeant Nell on the floor, and he pelted down the hall towards the back entrance of Longview House as if he were a youthful decathlete of 20. God alone knew where Nash thought he was going. Where could he run to? But he ran. John Corbett Morgan leaped to the doorway almost as quickly, where he turned his head and bellowed at the top of his lungs. Morgan did not call the SS guards. He called the dog. "Bruno, runner, kill!" H. Covington. Brindled furry form seemed to fly past the open door, 5 feet in the air. The attack dog caught Nash somewhere outside in the rear garden, out of sight of the people in the room. There was a single pistol shot from Nash's gun, but the Gelfs were designed to take a bullet or two. For about 15 seconds, the corridors of the old mansion rang with the hideous screams of a human being who was being torn limb from limb. Then there came an appalling silence. Several SS guards appeared at the door, submachine guns at the ready. "Mr. President, what the hell?" shouted the officer of the guard in stunned amazement. "That was old Mr. Nash That was a traitor," said Morgan. His voice was ice, and his face was stone. "Later, Captain." "Don't worry, son, I may be old, but I haven't lost my marbles yet. There was a reason. I'll fill you and your boys in later on. Right now, get the dog to a vet and get whatever is left of that. Get it out of here." "Yes, sir," said the captain, stunned. Morgan closed the door. He turned to Redmond and the staring group of people in the library. "Corey Nash betrayed the Olympic flying column?" said Leach in utter amazement. "But how? I remember seeing him around camp a few times back then, but I don't remember him being anywhere around on that night." "There's still a few gaps in the how," said Redmond. "Unfortunately, now we'll probably never know what they are, unless Trudy Griner can tell us. I am particularly looking forward to her account of what happened during the 4 hours between the time she left the safe house at 3 in the morning and the time she didn't show at 7 in Polsbo. Assuming I am allowed to hear it, I'm not sure that will happen. A little time ago someone suggested to me that when she crosses the border, Trudy be taken to a locked room from which she would never emerge. Is that going to happen, sir?" demanded Don of the president bitterly. "Is Trudy going to be taken to a locked room where she meets someone like Nash, some O.C. Ogilvy Jr., or a Guelph dog? Because after all this, if she's still just going to end up as fertilizer in a hydroponics farm, let's just invoke the Official Secrets Act, and we can all go home right now, all right?" "No," said Morgan tonelessly. "That will not happen. I thought about it, but no, that will not happen. You have my word." "Thank you, sir. I am glad to hear it. Getting back to your question as to what Nash did and how, Admiral Leach, in a general way, we've got that figured out. Nash was acting as a courier and liaison between Murdoch and the president's own column, operating in the northern part of the Olympic Peninsula. He carried information and orders from the Army Council, stuff that could not be communicated over the air or put in writing. Murdoch naturally accepted that anything Nash told him came from higher up, and that was the chink in his armor Nash used to destroy him and the others. As such, Nash came into contact with Trudy Griner, and he somehow convinced her to tell Murdoch that John Morgan was going to meet him somewhere, along Ambush Alley that morning, along with the entire Port Townsend column for a combined mission. He also involved himself in the planning of this non-existent plan to the extent that he was able to give Coleman of the Fat Pose all the details, including the make and color of the vehicles in the convoy. This kind of combined operation had been done before, with the attack on the American aircraft carrier John F. Kennedy, so there would have been credibility to the story. That would have meant that we would have been able to party down in Port Orchard with about 150 people and really do the place up good and proper like Quantrill did Lawrence, Kansas in 1863. Level everything flying that red, white, and blue Masonic dish rag. Murdoch must have been thrilled at the prospect, so eager to inflict a titanic blow against Zog that he didn't scope the idea close enough and spot the holes in it. "There never was any such plan," said Morgan. "We always avoided that type of major combined operation, simply too much to lose if it went bad. There were rare exceptions, of course, like the attack on the Kennedy, but those exceptions were carefully planned and organized at the highest level." "I know, sir, but apparently Nash was able to sell the idea, with Trudy's unwitting help. Murdoch trusted Trudy Griner and Nash must have convinced Trudy. Afterwards, well, we still don't know what happened in that 4-hour time period. Somehow Nash must have diverted Trudy Griner from her rendezvous in Polsbo, most likely when he met her to deliver the van we were to use as an impromptu ambulance, and change vehicles with her. H. Covington." Shaking his head in amazement, Ed M.C. Canless asked, "But in the name of all that is holy, Colonel, why? Why did he do it? And why did he falsely accuse Trudy? And what else did he do down through the years against the state?" wondered Morgan grimly. "Have I been harboring a spy in my own household all this time?" "I doubt he did anything else at all, sir," said Redmond. "I'm going on my personal knowledge of the man, but my opinion on that is also due to the fact that as a boss agent I have never seen anything that indicated any serious security breach anywhere that close to you, Mr. President." My guess is that when we get through tearing apart and examining under a microscope every day of Corey Nash's life that we can trace, we will find that he was an absolutely loyal and dedicated white revolutionary and party member both before Ravenhill and after. My guess is that the betrayal of the Olympic flying column was Corey Nash's only act of disloyalty to the Republic. I know that's kind of like saying, other than that, how did you enjoy the play, Mrs. Lincoln? But I am convinced that Ravenhill was a one-shot deal with Nash. As to why he did it, the answer is simple and terrible. He loved her. Young Trudy Griner was the only woman and probably the only human being that Corey Nash ever loved in the normal sense of the word, or as close to normal as a man with his terrible past could ever love anyone. "I'm sorry, Colonel, you've lost me," admitted Frierson frankly. How in the name of God does Nash's fixation on Trudy Griner lead to the death of 52 volunteers and fitting her up for it? "There we enter into the realm of madness," said Redmond, shaking his head. "Nell and I did a Section 30 entry on Nash's hunting and fishing cabin up along Hood Canal, ironically enough not far from Hoodsport, the last meeting place of the Olympic flying column. We found evidence there that Trudy Griner has haunted Nash all his life since then, a kind of weird shrine to her memory, and some very disjointed writings in a kind of diary." "Yeah, he was bloody bonkers all right," said Nell, shaking his head. "I tried to read that journal or whatever it was. He seemed to think Trudy Griner was some kind of supernatural being, sometimes an angel, sometimes a devil, sometimes a kind of extraterrestrial. Being or emissary. The man hadn't the full shilling, XA. Colonel Redmond tells me this kind of thing was called gooboo." "Love is a kind of madness at the best of times," said Redmond grimly. "When it gets bitter and twisted in a mind that is already diseased, the results can be truly bizarre, unbelievably destructive. Gooboo. I believe that the early murders of his family in Zimbuggery completely unhinged the man. Look, anyone who met old Corey, even back in those revolutionary days, very quickly discerned that he was a few bricks shy of a load. Some of you who remembered him from that time told me as much, but we wrote it off as mere eccentricity. Our movement long ago fell into a very bad habit of tolerating odd and eccentric behavior that verged on cacklebox material, so long as we felt we could get some mileage out of an individual. Some vestiges of this survive even today, Corey Nash being a prime example." Redmond pointedly avoided looking at Dr. Joseph Cord. "This isn't the only time that extremely dangerous practice has come back to bite us. It used to happen all the time back in the old man's day. We put up with Corey Nash because Nash made himself useful in 100 ways. He talked to himself occasionally, true, but on the other hand, he didn't rave, he didn't stab strangers with scissors, he didn't think he was Napoleon, and he was coherent if cantankerous. He found this little niche here in the Morgan household as a kind of eccentric butler type, so he appeared to be more or less functional in real life. No one ever connected him with the Olympic flying column disaster." "Maybe he didn't mean for things to go that far," suggested Brittany M.C. Canless. "Was the whole Ravenhill thing some terrible accident that went wrong? Or, God forbid, did he do it to her deliberately after he could no longer fail to understand that her heart belonged to Tom Murdoch even after Murdoch chose Melanie over her?" "I still don't get it, Colonel," said Arthur M.C. Bride, shaking his head. "He called Woodrow Coleman that night and betrayed and murdered 52 of his own people just to get this girl's attention in some way. Impress her? Impress her with what? The fact that he's a bloody bastard. This is way beyond me. How could he think that betraying the column to their deaths would show his love for Trudy?" demanded Drago, stunned, and H. A. Covington, appalled. "I told you when you spoke to me before the man must have been mad." "As a March hare," agreed Redmond. "I haven't been able to figure out the ins and the outs of it from his disjointed ravings in the book, which seemed to cover a period of some years. There are two possibilities," Redmond went on musingly, rubbing his chin. "As much as I have puzzled over his scribblings, I honest to God can't tell which one is correct. The first possibility is that he set the whole thing up as a complex revenge for her rejecting him, that he planned from square one falsely to implicate her for his own crime and betrayal. The second is that he didn't intend for it to play out that way, as far as Trudy being blamed for his own act of treachery, but somewhere along the line he screwed up. He had constructed in his own half-coherent mind some bizarre scenario whereby Murdoch would be removed from the scene by the Fatpos, and he would catch Trudy on the rebound, possibly after rescuing her in some knight in shining armor scenario. The only way to get at Murdoch was to go through the rest of the column. The fact that more than 50 volunteers would die alongside his rival evidently meant nothing to him. He was living in the world of his own private obsession, and nothing else was important. Damn, swore Palmieri, clenching his fists. Trudy would find herself in a tight spot, but one that he planned to get her out of and thus earn her appropriate gratitude, continued Redmond. Although we still don't know exactly why Trudy didn't show up at her post at the aid station, think of what it must have been like for her on that terrible morning. Remember, her cell phone was down, and she had no way of checking anything Nash told her. All Trudy knew was that the whole column was gone, and anyone who survived might have been an informer. Where else would she turn? He set this whole thing up so that Trudy would be forced to turn to him as a matter of survival. Turbulent and violent times such as revolutions can present a lot of opportunities like that. This man staked it all on one big chance to become Trudy Griner's knight in shining armor, saving her from a charge of treason and elevating her to revolutionary heroine status, and then reaping his reward, or so he thought in his mind. But something went wrong. Geez, I wish I knew what it was. I wish I knew what he said or did in those dark mornings. Hours so long ago. I suspect it is a horror story, but only she can fill us in now. Somehow he convinced her that she would be accused for what was about to happen, and that her only hope was to E&E. Maybe he asked her to go with him. Christ. Who knows? But for whatever reason, Trudy ran. Maybe she just took her own E&E route and planned on reporting back later on, but then realized she was being blamed for the ambush at Ravenhill, and she had to get the hell out of Dodge to save her own life. Like I said, there's some gaps yet, and some of them may never be fully answered now that Nash has been used as a chew toy by Bruno. But at some point later on, Nash painstakingly fabricated the $1 million documents that framed her for the betrayal he himself had committed. Whatever he originally intended, in the end the swine deliberately made sure Trudy took the fall for him. An ironic twist if he originally intended to be her rescuer and hero. No, I can't see it that way, disagreed MC Bride. The bastard knew damned well what he was doing. I told you that Coleman actually had a hand-drawn map describing the best terrain for setting up the ambush. Someone actually scouted the lay of the land ahead of time, and it wasn't monkey meat. Someone who is capable of deliberately assisting in the murder of his own comrades in that way is not capable of being motivated by romance, however twisted a version of romance. My wife and I had a turbulent relationship, but neither one of us ever worried 1 second about all those loaded guns in our house. We both knew there was never any need on either of our parts. You can sometimes hurt the one you love. May God forgive you, but you never destroy them. Destruction isn't love, it's hate. I tend to agree. Then there was that whole fraudulent bank transaction, said Nell. Maybe Nash did that later after she refused him to make sure Trudy would catch the blame and she'd be too afraid to come back and accuse him. But I don't think so. It's too much of a piece with the cold and methodical planning he showed over setting up the ambush. At some point he created these hoax computer printouts, dated them August the 1st, then somehow arranged for the first court of inquiry to discover them. He deliberately had her accused and convicted and tried to cause her death, but more than that he caused her to be slandered and vilified for all her life as a traitor. That is not love, Colonel. That is hate. H. Covington. Black overwhelming hatred of another individual that transcends every last boundary of reason or justice or right. The hatred of true madness. But surely Trudy must have known that Nash betrayed her as well as Murdoch, asked Palmieri. Why didn't she come to the party and denounce him? Well, we'll have to wait until she gets here to ask her, but I don't think she did know it was Nash at the time, said Redmond. In fact, she may not know it even now. Nash must have been the one that met her, delayed her from her post, and then after it hit the news that the column had been destroyed, told her that she must be suspected and she needed to lie low. Even now, she may not be aware of what he did. In her letter, she never did claim that she actually had any new evidence, just that she was tired of it all, and she was coming back to face the music. To this day, she may think that Corey Nash was indeed her knight in shining armor, the man who saved her. God, what a horrible thought. But if she has no new evidence, no way to prove her innocence, why is she coming back? Asked Leach in wonder. Because this is her homeland, said Redmond. Because by virtue of her blood, she has the right to live here and to die here. Morgan was shaking his head. Don. Jesus, Don, you don't mean to tell me that after almost 40 years it turns out. Yes, sir, said Don, his face absolutely deadpan. The butler did it. After the others left in bemusement, Don rounded on Morgan. God damn it, what the hell did you do to me? He roared. Why? What have I ever done that you should do something like this to me? You knew, didn't you? You knew all along it was Nash. Morgan sighed and sank into his chair. I had an idea. John, you have to tell me, commanded Don. Did you know it was Nash? Have you nursed this viper in the bosom of our family for a whole generation? All this time did you let a sister of our race live in hell, disgraced and vilified by her own people, solely in order to save yourself from scandal and political embarrassment at failing to detect a traitor that close to you? I'm sorry you think me capable of that, son, said the old man sadly. I'm a bad man, Don, but not that bad. You are capable of whatever you feel is necessary, as am I, as are we all. We're volunteers, and it is the way we chose long ago. Did you know? Repeated Don. Did I know? Replied Morgan softly. No, Don, I did not know, not for certain. As I hope for the salvation of my soul, that is the truth. You suspected, and you still did nothing. It was not a question or an accusation, it was simply a statement. Can you prove that, Copper? Laughed Morgan bitterly. Legally, no. To a moral certainty, yes, said Don. Gelf dogs are programmed to respond to the digitally authenticated voice commands of certain individuals. They cannot attack any person whom they recognize by smell and sound and voice print as a command-authorized human being. The animal's mind will not accept such an order. You ordered the dog out there to kill Nash, and he did so. That means that Nash was not command-authorized for that Gelf. I now recall that while you had our own family dog Baskerville command authorized for all of our family, including yourself, you did not authorize him with a voice print for Corey Nash, your lifelong aide and companion in arms to our family. That indicates to me that you knew, or at least that you suspected, that someday some occasion might possibly arise when we might have to be protected from Nash. There was silence for a time. The suspicion was there, yes, admitted Morgan. When did it appear in my mind? I honestly don't know. Some time back. What caused that suspicion? A word, a glance, a thought. I don't know. Just one day it was there and it has gnawed on me ever since. There was never any proof, and I did not seek any. You didn't seek any? Mother of God, why not? Shouted Don in incredulous rage. 52 volunteers, sir. 52 men and women of our race butchered by Zog because one man among us was a dysfunctional nut of the kind we should have purged from day one. What did the old man tell us from the beginning? Never try to get mileage out of creeps. How much mileage did you get out of H. Covington? Corey Nash down through the years? Enough to justify 52 dead white men and women? How? Damn, you John. How could you? Redmond was on the verge of breaking down into tears. Morgan spoke to him in a voice of stone. Do you seriously believe, Don, that you can say to me one single thing, that you can utter to me one single reproach or accusation or denunciation that has not burned into my brain and my heart and my soul, night after night for years? Whatever you think it may be your duty to curse and rail against me now, I assure you, hit war already done. 1,000 times over, 1,000,000 times over. Why did you do nothing? Demanded Don. How could you let Nash stay so close to you, to me, to Sarah, to my children? You must have known what we all knew, that he was never completely right in the head. What were you thinking, man? I believed, and as it turned out I believed correctly, that he would never again do anything quite so evil, sighed Morgan. Although that business with Hillary Clinton came close. That was an accident, by the way. Never mind, all that's gone now. Don, I owed Corey Nash. Owed him big time. Did it never strike you as odd that in all the time you have known both of us, I never told you how we met? How we came into the family, so to speak? Don frowned. You know, damned if you ever did, he said softly, remembering in surprise. How strange. During this whole investigation, that thought never even crossed my mind. Nash was just always there. He was the first person who opened the door at that house in Bellevue when I knocked on it at age 12 to collect my newspaper money. I remember he tried to Jew me down on the price. How did you meet? You know how Sarah's mother died? Asked Morgan. Yes, said Don. I also know that Sarah ran away from the corrective school where they sent her to be denazified, and somehow she was able to get back to you up in the mountains, just before you came down to Bellevue to organize No. 2 Seattle Brigade, where I ended up. Sarah and I have never spoken of it. It is the one off-limits subject between us, not overtly forbidden, just closed. She's never actually said to me that she doesn't want to talk about it. It's just that I've always known that to speak of it would hurt her more than any possible good that could ever come of it. Over the years, we have developed an understanding that it's the one and only topic that we will never talk about. Once a year or so, Sarah makes some passing reference to Vandy, and I pointedly don't take her up on it. I believe she notices this, but she has never voluntarily offered to lift the taboo, and I have no intention of asking. She obviously wants to keep that one door locked, and I have always respected her wishes. Morgan lit a cigar. His hands were shaking as they held the match. I was in the mountains for the first time when Zog tracked down my family. They were in a safe house in Ballard, although it obviously wasn't as safe as we thought it was. Vandy saw them coming in time to get Sarah dressed and sent her running out the back door, but they caught her anyway. That was early days. They didn't have the special camp set up then, so they took Vandy and Sarah to the King County Jail. The federal section was notorious. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security had a special treatment there they would inflict on women volunteers. There was this one Jew FBI agent. "Sir, I know what happened," said Don. "You don't have to." "Did you know they made Sarah watch in case she knew where I was and she'd betray me to save her mother?" asked Morgan, staring out the window. "Yes, sir, I know. It is a matter of historical record. Odd, isn't it? Everyone in this whole country knows what happened. Yet Sarah and I are the only ones who pretend we don't. And no one speaks of it. No one, not ever. Not for 40 years. My God, what a mighty and magnificent compassion and respect we receive as a family, from an entire nation. It fills me with awe every time I think of it. How could anyone not love this land and this people?" "Well, there are some details you don't know. When it happened, Corey Nash was in the same jail, on the floor above," went on Morgan tonelessly. "He'd gotten caught heisting some wheels for the NVA, but the idiots pegged him as an ordinary car thief, and he was waiting in the bullpen to get bailed out by a party bondsman. Some Seattle cops were taking him down for out-processing. They got another call for something or other, and they tossed Corey into a holding cell on the federal block until they could. Covington get back to him. Then they forgot about him until noon the next day, an open holding cell, no walls, just bars. Right next to where lay what was left of my wife and my child." "Ah, I think I understand," said Don with a nod. "FBI Special Agent in Charge Bruce Goldberg. He liked to play with electric drills into the skull and turkey basters of acid. Do-it-yourself lobotomies, he called them, one of their most notorious and brutal counterterrorism operatives. I remember. He and his entire family were found dead in their home several months later. The family was shot. Goldberg had been burned to death with a necklace." "So that was Nash who did that?" "Yeah, that sounds like his style. I can see why." "No, it wasn't Nash," snapped Morgan. "Shut up and listen to me, goddammit. Christ, boy, do you think that I would leave a personal obligation like that to anyone else? That Goldberg job was me and Tom Murdoch and O.C. Ogilvy. No, what Nash did in that prison cell, it was nothing less than holy, sacred, touched with the divine spirit of human mercy and compassion. Kind of odd that we can speak of Nash in such terms, eh? But we can." "Tell me," ordered Don softly. "Somebody had left one of those old styrofoam coffee cups in the cell he was in. You remember those? It was raining, and Nash was able to get up onto the cell's bunk and stick the cup into an outside corner of the barred window where there was a little drip. It wasn't much, but throughout the night he managed to refill that cup again and again. Sarah dragged her mother over to the bars, and time and again, Corey Nash held that cup of water to what remained of Vandy's mouth, and she was able to drink a little. And in between times, while he waited for that slow drip from the rain to fill the cup in the barred window, Corey Nash comforted my 10-year-old daughter, who was by then quite out of her mind. Sarah had become a child again, a little baby, and Nash sensed this. She was talking baby talk, curling up in the fetal position, on the verge of shutting down her brain and leaving us forever. So he sang to her, every children's song he could think of, London Bridge is Falling Down, Mary Had a Little Lamb, Barney the Dinosaur, and great big gobs of greasy, grimy gopher guts, the alphabet song, anything. He told her every story he could think of. 3 Little Pigs, Jack and the Beanstalk, Rumpelstiltskin and Rapunzel, Little Red Riding Hood, and he held her hand through the bars. It wasn't me, it was Corey Nash who was holding Sarah's hand in the dawn when her mother died before her eyes. Somehow Nash kept Sarah with us in her mind. He also managed to get into Sarah's head an address and phone number in Seattle. Afterwards, when she got away from them, Sarah didn't come looking for me. She came looking for Corey Nash. Nash brought her back to me, past the fatties and the cops and the Homeland Security and the FBI. From that moment on, I lived in his debt. Please try to understand that, Don. You have to remember, this was in the time of It Takes a Village, when white children were being stolen away every day. I had already accepted in my mind that Sarah was gone forever from me, just like her mother. You have Cindy L., you have Eva, so can you understand what that means? I had accepted in my own mind that my beautiful girl was gone forever, taken from me by the beast to live the rest of her life at the bottom of a latrine, for all the world to piss and shit on. I think I went insane for a time, and I probably would have gone Ogilvy's way. I'd have been dead myself soon after. And then one day up there in the Olympic Mountains, I saw Sarah rise from the dead. I saw Corey Nash walk into camp, and he's leading my little girl by the hand. He returned my child to me, returned her from the dead. Don, whatever you may think of me, that is a debt that one never, ever forgets or betrays. That was what, 6 months? 10 months before I met Sarah? Whispered Don in wonder. She never said anything. Not then, not to this very day. Now you tell me how the hell I was supposed to call that man in here and accuse him of treason to his face without any proof at all? Based on nothing more than a funny feeling, a nagging, baseless suspicion? Asked Morgan. What if I was wrong? Worse, what if I was right? What was I supposed to tell Sarah? So you put it off. You put it off for almost 40 years. Until Trudy Griner came back and you couldn't put it off anymore, and then you dumped it onto me, said Don. Yes, said Morgan. I put it off until Trudy Griner came back and I couldn't put it off anymore, and then I dumped it onto you. It is the only act of cowardice I have ever committed in my life. For what it's worth, I'm damned sorry about it. H. Covington. Why me? Sarah will forgive you for taking Corey from her, said Morgan. I'm not sure she'll ever forgive me, and now I get to go home and tell her, said Don wearily, standing up to go. Morgan stood up as well. I'll come with you, he said. I'll do it. I'd rather you didn't, Mr. President, said Don. When I'm given an assignment, I prefer to carry it out to the end. Myself. You're wrong, by the way. Sarah is still a soldier after all these years, a volunteer, and she knows this vicious life we have lived inside out. She is also your daughter, and a very wise and compassionate woman. You're wrong about her. She will forgive you. But will Trudy Griner ever forgive you? Now that's another story entirely. The woman was small and trim, her hair thin and white, and her slight figure on the concrete seemed dwarfed and tiny against the soaring height of Mount Shasta on the northern horizon. She wore a subdued and businesslike skirt and jacket, and sensible shoes. Although she had to rely occasionally on a cane, she walked with calm and deliberate steps across the open bridge at Mountain Gate, California, and for the first time in more than 30 years, she stepped onto the soil of the Northwest American Republic. She was calm. She had made her peace with God and composed herself for death. It was barely past 8 o'clock in the morning when Gertrude Griner began what she felt would surely be her last walk on Earth. As she passed the customs inspection station, over which the green, white, and blue tricolors snapped in the wind, a single civil guard in full-dress khaki uniform stood to attention smartly and gave her the open-palmed National Socialist salute. She stepped off the bridge onto the white side of the border where she saw the long lines of men in SS-dress black tunics with silver piping, spit-shined jackboots and coal-scuttle helmets gleaming, white-gloved hands bright on immaculate rifles at parade rest. They were lined up on either side of the ancient highway leading to the northwest, toward home. There was total silence. Behind the ranks of the Special Service were vans from the Northwest Broadcasting Authority and a number of the foreign media, who were authorized to report the news from the Republic. Their cameras were rolling, but no one was saying anything. They all seemed to be watching something. Trudy hesitated briefly, dazed, completely uncomprehending. She had envisioned this moment for years. She had resigned herself to arrest, and then God only knew what kind of ordeal before the end. She of all people knew what the men who had made this land and raised that green, white, and blue banner into the sky were capable of. But whatever she had expected, it was not this. Had she walked into the middle of some kind of 1022 parade or commemoration? She walked down the center of the road towards whatever awaited her. As she walked, an officer somewhere shouted a crisp order, and on both sides of her the SS men snapped the rifles up, bayonets fixed, and hundreds of white-gloved hands presented arms at the military salute. Trudy Griner suddenly saw a group of people step out in front of her. There were 9 of them, and she knew them all. They were older and grayer now, and even at a distance their faces seemed to her to be filled with a portion of the sadness she had known for so many years. Crazy old Bible-thumping Joe with his heavy spectacles. That short, fat old guy. Could that possibly be the buff and powerful young Frank Palmieri? Drago's mustache she recognized at once, white as it was. And Britt M.C. Canless, still tall and straight, her braided hair down to her waist. Yes, that was her, despite the years. That had to be Ed standing at her side. Big Bill in his camouflage, Lars and Dave in naval dress blue. At their head stood a tall old man with a white beard and a grim face. Him she recognized immediately. She walked forward resolutely and stared up at him. "Hello, John," she said, ready to die. "Hello, Trudy," he said. Tears were streaming down the old man's face into his beard. He took a small velvet box from his pocket. His voice quavered. "I believe I have something of yours." He opened the box and took out the Medal of the War of Independence. He leaned over and pinned it onto her bodice. "Welcome, my comrade and sister," he said, his voice cracking. "Welcome home."